I don't want to talk about it. It just stirs things up. Maybe you've said it. Maybe you've been hearing it a lot lately. I know I have. Maybe somebody said it to you about something that really mattered and you are still carrying that around with you. Either way, you know exactly what that moment feels like. Hey everybody, welcome back to the channel. I'm Rachel. There is this quote that's been hanging around in my brain lately. Martin Luther King Jr. said, "In the end, we will remember not the words of our enemies, but the silence of our friends." He said that in the middle of one of the most turbulent times in American history. But somehow, it sounds like something he could have written this morning. Because we are living in a moment where silence has become a strategy, where I don't want to talk about it has become a socially acceptable response to almost anything that matters. And it gets dressed up as wisdom or keeping the peace, as being the reasonable one in the room. But here's what I keep thinking. Nothing good has ever come from not talking about it. Nothing. Not in a marriage, not in a friendship, not in a workplace, not in a civilization. Tell me, when has strategic silence ever resolved the thing that made everybody uncomfortable in the first place? It doesn't resolve it. It just makes the discomfort this load-bearing wall that you build everything else on top of and hope it holds. And for a while, it does. That's kind of the seductive part. But we're confusing the absence of conflict with the presence of peace. Those are not the same thing, and they never were. And it's not always, "I don't want to talk about it," said out loud. Sometimes it's quieter than that. Sometimes it's a look. You know the one. The look that says, "I know exactly what you're going through," and then the subject changes. The look exchanged across a room that acknowledges something real is happening, but there is this unspoken agreement that we are all going to let it pass without saying a word, because saying the word makes it real, and real things require a response. So instead, we give each other looks. We check in with our eyes and opt out with our mouths, and somehow we have convinced ourselves that that counts as being there for somebody. It doesn't. And then there's the version that gets justified as protecting the relationship. I don't want to bring it up because it might cause a rift. Here's the thing about that though, and I say this sincerely because I've done this too. The rift is already there. You can feel it. They can feel it. Everybody in the room can feel it. The silence is not preventing the rift. It's ignoring it. An unexamined rift doesn't heal. It just gets wider underneath everything else until one day the distance between two people who used to be close is so big that neither of them can quite remember when it happened or how. It happened in the silences. That's how. And then there's the hardest version of all of this. It's the family member who chooses their own comfort, their own version of how things should be, their own beliefs, their own need for everything to stay familiar and uncomplicated over the actual real needs of somebody sitting right across the table from them. Somebody who loves them. Somebody who isn't asking to be agreed with or even completely understood. Somebody who just needs them to show up. You don't have to be cruel to fail somebody. You just have to be absent or quiet. You just have to decide that your peace of mind matters more than their reality. That keeping your world tidy is worth more than acknowledging that theirs is hard. And the person across that table, they know. They've known for a while. They're not waiting for you to have the right words. They're just waiting to find out if you're going to be somebody who stays or stands with them. There's this story. You may have heard it. Guy falls into a hole. The walls are so steep, he can't get out. A doctor passes by. The man calls up for help. The doctor writes out a prescription, drops it in, and keeps walking. A priest comes along, hears him, writes out a prayer, drops it in, and moves on. Then a friend walks by. The man calls up, "Hey, it's me, can you help?" And the friend jumps in the hole. The man looks at him, "Are you stupid? Now we're both stuck down here." And the friend says, "Yeah, but I've been down here before, and I know the way out." That's it. The whole thing. Not a prescription from a safe distance, not a prayer floated down from above. Just somebody willing to get in the hole with you. Somebody who knows what it's like down there and shows up anyway. That's what people actually remember, not the ones who meant well from a comfortable distance. The the ones who jumped in. King wasn't talking about enemies. He was talking about friends, people who cared, or said they did, people who agreed in private that something was wrong, people you would have bet anything would show up and who just didn't. And that's the part that stays with you. Not the opposition, the people who knew and went quiet anyway. Because an enemy's hostility, it's expected. You can orient yourself against it. You know where it's coming from and roughly what it wants. But a friend's silence, that's disorienting in a completely different way. It creates a specific kind of alone. The kind where you're surrounded by people who understand exactly what you're facing and have made a quiet decision to let you face it alone. That is not being neutral. That's making a choice. It just gets to wear a neutral face. The Stoics had this concept that I keep coming back to. The idea that we're not responsible for what we do, but for what we allow. The inaction is still action. The silence is still a statement. It's just an unsigned one. Marcus Aurelius wrote about the obligation to speak when something is wrong, not because it's comfortable or it'll be well received, but because integrity isn't something you practice in private and then set aside when it gets inconvenient. You don't get to believe something is wrong and then live like it isn't. At some point, what you do has to match what you know. And I need to be clear about something because I think this kind of matters. I'm not talking about having the loudest opinion in every room. I'm not talking about turning every conversation into a debate or staking out a position on everything just to prove you're paying attention. That is its own kind of bullshit. I'm talking about something quieter and harder than that. I am talking about the moment when someone you care about is in the middle of something real, something that matters, and you feel that pull to change the subject, to give them the look, to say you don't want to stir things up and let the moment pass because engaging with it costs something. We have all felt that pull. The question isn't whether you felt it. The question is what you did with it. Because here's the thing about silence. It doesn't stay neutral. It doesn't just sit there passively in the space where words should have been. It metastasizes into distance and resentment, into the slow loss of trust that happens when people realize over time that you will be there for them, except when it counts. And the painful irony, the thing that makes King's words still burn 60 years later, is that the person who stays silent usually believes they're being careful, measured, mature even. They think they're choosing peace, but what they're actually choosing is their peace at someone else's expense. That is not the same thing, and it never was. And what I don't think people fully realize is the long game of all of this. When you step back from somebody in their hard moments, when you go quiet, when you choose your comfort over their reality, when you decide that the hard part of showing up is more than you want to deal with, you're also making a decision about what happens later. Not everyone is going to be the bigger person when things reverse. Not everyone is going to ignore how you weren't there and show up for you anyway. Some people are going to remember, with a clarity that surprises you, exactly who was in the hole with them and who kept walking. And some people are going to wait a long time for a phone call that doesn't come, from someone who made a decision somewhere along the way that the relationship was something they could afford to let go of. You don't always know you've made that decision until it's already made. Moral courage has never been about grand gestures. It's rarely the moment where the right thing is obvious and the only question is whether you're brave enough. It's almost always smaller than that, and harder. It's the conversation you keep putting off, the thing you know but haven't said, the look you gave when you should have spoken, the family member you've been meaning to really talk to, the friend who needed someone to get in the hole with them and got a prescription dropped in instead. It's the built-up weight of all the small silences that felt, individually, like nothing. Where you stand matters, but who you stand by, that's what people actually remember. Because sometimes it is what you've posted. It is your opinions. what you said out loud and what you stayed carefully silent on. Your people see that. They see all of it, and they remember. They remember if you showed up, if you stayed. They remember if you stood up for someone even when you didn't agree with their choices. If you stayed when it was genuinely hard for you because you knew without question it was harder for them. They remember if, when somebody you cared about was in the middle of something real and hard and uncomfortable, you were the person who jumped in the hole. Or if you were the person who gave them the look and kept walking. That's what King was pointing at. Not the enemies, the friends, the ones who knew and decided that the discomfort of staying was a bigger problem than whatever was actually happening. In the long run, the real long run, they'll know exactly who got in the hole with them. And so will you. Just something to sit with. Think about somebody in your life right now who might be at the bottom of that hole. And ask yourself, honestly, are you just writing prescriptions from up above, or are you jumping in? Thanks for watching. Take care of you. Reggie and I will see you in the next video. Bye-bye.